Have you ever wondered which network, whether it's Netflix or Disney Plus, which network do you want to subscribe to make sure that you get the most woke indoctrinating content? Well, GLAD, their studio responsibility index report now reveals the rankings and where your favorite streaming service sits in terms of propaganda. Now, some people, mostly leftist weirdos, probably think this is a reason to subscribe to certain paid services. And with a new price increase coming up for Netflix, I suspect people may be using this for a different reason. Perhaps as the economy tightens up, perhaps maybe a reason to cancel them. Place your guesses now in the comments or chat which you think is going to be the wokest. This via boundingintocomics.com. It's that time of year again, the time where LGBTQ watchdog organization GLAAD rates major Hollywood studios on just how LGBTQ content, how much, they are squeezing into their films and television content. Responsible for the increasing push of gay, transgender, and non-binary content produced for big and small screens across the world, GLAAD CEO Sarah Kate Ellis is the face and voice behind Hollywood's largest LGBTQ lobby. For the last 10 years, GLAAD has conducted an annual Studio Responsibility Index, which tracks just how woke Hollywood is, and while every major studio is pushing LGBTQ content, some major studios in the eyes of GLAAD are doing a much better job than others. I'm going to suspect it's Netflix, but we'll find out. Of the 350 films released theatrically and on track streaming services by the 10 distributors counted in 2022, 100 or 28.5% were, quote, LGBTQ inclusive. So 28.5% of films included LGBTQ references or whatever, even though they represent less than 5% of the population, whatever that is. Interesting. GLAAD reveals their support in the report, noting that the highest percentage of the numbers recorded in this report. The report shows an 8% increase in LGBTQ representation from last year's report. They further specified, of the 100 LGBTQ inclusive films released in 2022, 55% included gay men, 45% included gay women, 21% included bis and characters, bi plus characters, and 12% included trans characters. 12% of films contained trans characters when they represent less than 1% of the population. The report also shows a genre of comedy and drama had over 40% of the films be LGBTQ inclusive. So the idea that there isn't an agenda here, I mean, that's long gone. And I think that, I've always been on the softer side of this. I've always been look, I don't care if there are any one of the alphabet letters represented in a movie. To pretend that gay people don't exist is absurd. Of course they exist. Trans people exist. Now, the numbers are drastically less than what most people think and what Hollywood wants you to think, and even what Republicans and Democrats want you to think. These communities are used to raise money. They're used to pit each other against each other, but there's no real amount of these individuals. So the reality is, when you have this overrepresentation, that's when you get into well, wait a minute. Was it about a natural representation of a certain group that exists in the real world, and or is it that you want to force it on people, push it on people, advertise it? I think that's more than most people think. For me, obviously, if you have a gay person in a movie, big deal. It doesn't matter. But if the movie's theme And like advertising and messaging is about how stunning and brave it is and how more people should do this and that. That's different, right? It goes from an existence to propaganda. And you look at A24, 34%, 36%, 14 total films, 5 LGBTQ inclusive. Amazon Studios. Interesting. Wow, Amazon, so woke. 12 out of 35. Apple TV, 2 out of 11. Lionsgate, 1 out of 6. NBC Universal, 9 out of 37. Netflix, now their percentage took a hit probably. 24 LGBTQ inclusive films out of 107. Paramount, 29%. And the Walt Disney Company leading the charge with 41% of their film. Nearly 50% of Disney's films included, quote, LGBTQ inclusivity, beat only by Warner Brothers. What's interesting is it says rating insufficient, 8 out of 19. Why wouldn't that be extremely high? Nearly 50% of Walt Disney movies included LGBTQ inclusivity. Now, what is that described as? It's difficult to say. The Walt Disney Company scored a 41%, the second highest rating, for featuring 24, quote, LGBTQ inclusive films out of 59. With a total of 107 films in 2022, Netflix received a fair rating with just 22%. Netflix and Disney feature the most LGBTQ inclusive films out of any studio. Regarding GLAAD's own definition of favorable ratings, Disney, NBC Universal, A24 received the best rating of good in the report for having at least 1/3 of all film content supporting LGBTQ representation. They need at least 33%. Warner Brothers Discovery received the best percentage out of any other studio with 42%. The only studio to receive a poor rating was Lionsgate, featuring only one LGBTQ inclusive film out of 6 cinematic projects in 2022. GLAAD specifically brings attention to Clerks 3 for teasing LGBTQ representation but not committing to it, noting that the film has a scene where the protagonist's deceased wife mentioned the men and women that she had hooked up with in heaven. It reads more like a throwaway joke than solid representation, they complain, adding GLAAD urges Lionsgate to make more efforts for solid and meaningful LGBTQ representation in future projects. Along with scoring film studios, GLAAD is also using the Vito-Russo test to rate individual movies on just how, quote, LGBTQ inclusive they are, which stipulates a film can only be approved if it meets all 4 of the following criteria. 1, the film contains a character that is identifiably lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and or queer. So you have a character that's gay, okay? 2, that character must not be solely or predominantly defined by their orientation or gender identity. Well, yeah, but why does it even matter? Like, if I'm watching like an action film, I don't really care who people like. It doesn't even matter. The LGBT character must also be tied to the plot in such a way that the character's removal would have a significant effect. So you have to have LGBTQ characters, and they have to be important in every role. Meaning the character is not there simply to provide colorful commentary. And also, LGBTQ's character story must not be outwardly offensive. In films with multiple LGBT characters, at least one character must pass this point for the film to pass the test. You want to know why modern cinematography and modern streaming is the way it is? This is why. This is why. According to GLAAD, 100 out of 350 Hollywood films released in 2022 were inclusive films. Of those 100, only 77 passed the veto Russo test, or a 77% of all LGBTQ inclusive movies saw the percentage of Hollywood films with LGBTQ inclusion increased by 10% from 12% in 2021 to 22% in 2022. Furthermore, the percentage of films passing the veto Russo test increased from 56 to 77. I mean, this is why modern cinema is the way it is. This is exactly why you see what you do in commercials. Exactly why you see what you see in streaming, in various platforms. Not surprised in the least bit. It is an agenda. It absolutely. And this kind of behavior is also a precursor, or there are certain requirements around this type of representation in any type of award ceremonies. In order to get an award, you must also qualify for all these type of things. Disney. The kids company is with 41%, definitely leading the way. Not surprised at all.